Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a garden that doesn't care what time your phone says. The sun's already half asleep. The earth feels warm under your feet. And somewhere just ahead, yes, that sound is a peacock screaming like it's been personally offended by gravity. You're standing at the edge of a Mughal paradise garden, surrounded by trimmed hedges so symmetrical they could shame a graphing calculator. Fountains gurgle softly in the distance. And beside one, a gardener dips his hand into the water, not to check the time, but to check the shadow of a peacock. You probably won't survive this. If you expect time to be reasonable, in this world, clocks are ornamental nonsense. What truly rules this garden's rhythm is the length and angle of a peacock's shadow. Feathered, irritable, and absurdly glamorous, these birds parade through stone paths like living sundials. One particularly snobby one is strutting between two pomegranate trees, and the lead gardener, he squints at the bird's plume like it's a holy script. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're listening from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step inside, not through a gate, but through a jharoka, a carved marble screen used more for beauty than security. It's not even locked. Why would it be? Time here isn't kept with locks or alarms. It's measured in slow-moving shadows, sleepy winds, and a deeply passive-aggressive bird with a crown of feathers. The ground under your feet isn't quite soil. It's packed, perfumed dust, laced with petals and powdered bark from some tree that probably has its own royal biography. And everything is quiet. The kind of quiet that leans like the world is holding its breath. Then you see it. A glimmer of green-blue tail feathers stretches long across the sandstone, its fringe pointing to a small indentation carved at the base of a fountain. The gardener nods. It's watering time. Not because his watch beeped. He doesn't have one. It's because the peacock's shadow, according to some long-standing agreement between heaven, sun, and royal horticulture, just crossed the watering line. Historians still argue whether the peacock as clock idea originated with Emperor Babur himself or evolved gradually over generations of bored gardeners who refused to learn how sundials worked. What we do know is this: by the late 16th century, many Mughal garden rotas were scheduled around shadow lengths, and peacocks, already symbols of regality and mysticism, became the divas of irrigation management. The birds, of course, couldn't care less. They screech, they steal grapes. One tries to peck your sandal. Another flaps dramatically into a banana tree as if offended by your existence. Still, the gardeners watch them religiously, because the feathers don't lie. A fully extended tail feather under morning light creates a long shadow ideal for signaling the first watering. By mid-morning, the angle shifts. By noon, the shadow aligns with stone lines etched subtly along walkways. There's even a special spot near the lotus pond where the shadow of the peacock's crest will fall directly into a carved groove signaling "do not water." That's nap time. For the emperor and the trees, you sit by a narrow channel where the water runs slow, just enough to whisper, not rush. Two gardeners in faded red tunics are crouched nearby, watching a peahen with the intensity of chess masters. One mumbles something in Persian, nods at the shadow, and gestures toward the jasmine bed. The younger gardener jogs off with a carved copper watering can shaped like a fish. Because of course it is. A light breeze shifts the scene. Petals tremble. Somewhere, someone claps twice, and the sound of a shallow spade hitting damp earth blends into the sleepy rhythm of a garden that doesn't need time to move. You glance again at the peacock. It's paused now, perfectly still, as if waiting for applause. Its shadow falls exactly on the center of a sun-warmed tile. That means water. The melons skip the saffron, and no singing near the rose beds. This schedule isn't just ancient instinct, it's calculated. Mughal gardens weren't random bursts of green, they were carefully constructed quadrants of paradise, divided by geometry, irrigated with science, and decorated with metaphor. And in this delicately balanced ecosystem, overwatering was as much a sin as neglect. hence the bird. One fringe belief scribbled in a forgotten botanical diary claims that Emperor Akbar once banned clocks entirely from his gardens after a sundial fell into a koi pond. Instead, he ordered all gardeners to consult the wisdom of feathers. Sounds poetic, also sounds fake, but the gardens believed it. So you sit, you wait, you watch the sunlight bend. Somewhere, a shadow lengthens to the length of a single banana leaf. And like clockwork, except without any clocks, a door opens near the melon patch. A gardener walks out, holding a brass bell, not to ring it, just to check if the shadow reaches its edge. It doesn't yet, so he waits, and so do you. The bell still hasn't rung, but you can hear the water. It begins as a trickle, shy and uncertain, from somewhere behind a carved stone lion's mouth. The lion, by the way, hasn't roared since 1632, but its open jaw still functions as a polite waterspout. The stream threads its way through a narrow, shallow channel etched into sandstone, perfectly level, as if the mason who carved it believed gravity required assistance. You trail the sound. It flows between citrus trees, past a bed of sleepy narcissus, and under a low bridge made entirely of black marble slick with mist and warm to the touch. Just beyond, the channel forks. One arm heads toward a shallow basin where lotus leaves float like gossip. The other veers off toward an orchard, where gardeners are kneeling in pairs, their palms open over the earth like they're praying for mud. One claps, a slow, echoing clap, followed by a muttered melody. Another gardener joins in, same song, different pitch. You realize they're singing to the rhythm of the water. It's not superstition, it's practice. Mughal irrigation wasn't just canals and levers. It was music, habit, and a kind of horticultural jazz. When the water flowed, so did the voices. Each shift had its own melody water songs that matched not just the volume of flow, but its personality. Early water sang fast, high-pitched tunes. Midday water, that called for baritone murmurs. And late afternoon, when the earth was drowsy, they hummed near silence. You kneel beside one of them. He doesn't look up, just gestures for you to place your hand on the stone. The water passes over your skin cool but not cold. Just warm enough to feel like it's been thinking all morning. That's second cycle. The gardener whispers, eyes still closed. Third cycle doesn't hum. It sighs. Of course it does. Historians still argue whether these irrigation songs were formal codes or just habit passed through generations. There's no official record, no scroll of garden DJ guidelines. But fragments exist. A traveler from Constantinople once wrote that Mughal gardeners sang river lullabies in dialects so local even nearby villages didn't recognize them. Another account from a French ambassador claimed the song lengths were tied to how long water should run through specific beds, measured not by clocks but by breath. Breath as time. You breathe in, slow and shallow. The channel gurgles beside you. A nearby fig tree lets one of its leaves fall, deliberately, into the water. And just like that, the song stops, not abruptly like a candle being blown out. The gardener blinks. That's enough, he says. No one questions why. The flow is redirected, not with gears or pipes or any dramatic engineering. Just a small sandalwood wedge placed into the fork of the channel. It tilts the water, redirects it, and the lotus basin, which had been soaking for exactly one peacock shadow's worth of time, is left to rest. You continue walking, passing under a series of vine-draped arches that smell of cardamom and wet stone. Beyond them is a tiered terrace, where rows of mint and marigold catch the light just so, like someone aimed a spotlight straight from the sky. Two boys apprentices, maybe are sweeping droplets off the stone, careful not to disturb the thin lines of wetness left by previous watering. Those lines are records. 2. Water logs. The darker the stripe, the more recently it was fed. One of the boys leans over and licks the edge of a stripe. He squints thoughtfully. Anise, he murmurs. Fed 30 minutes ago. You stare. He shrugs. We taste everything. A fringe detail from a forgotten travelogue insists Mughal garden apprentices were trained by taste as much as touch. They learned to identify plants not only by scent or appearance, but by licking dewdrops, sniffing stones, and sometimes chewing on single petals to detect dryness. While no mainstream text endorses mandatory plant licking, the sheer sensory intimacy between these gardeners and their terrain was unmatched. Even their tools were personal. You pass a rack of hand-forged watering spouts, each shaped slightly differently. One ends in a swan's beak, another in a dragon's snout. All of them are labeled with faded ink. That isn't actually Persian, it's just shorthand. Code. Some mark flow speed, others mark preferred crops, and some just have names. Rafiq, little moon, don't wake her. You don't ask. Instead, you follow the water again, back toward the center. The peacock is gone, but the shadow remains stretched now like a ribbon across a square plot filled with basil and bluebells. A gardener squats beside it with a stick, drawing invisible lines into the soil. He's not planting. He's measuring, not in inches, but in songs. One row gets 2 lines of melody, another only half a refrain. You want to ask what happens if someone sings off-key. But before you can, he chuckles and mutters. Only the basil gets fussy. Even the plants have opinions. You find a shaded bench. Beneath it, water flows silently in a clay pipe no wider than your wrist. Somewhere far away, it joins with a larger channel and eventually feeds a distant lily pond. You imagine the water traveling like a whispered story carried forward not by pressure, but by memory. The sun shifts again. You blink. The shadow's gone. The peacock hasn't returned, but now you hear it. One low trill, then a sharp screech, then silence. That means time to water. The west rosebed, the one with the petal shaped like curled parchment and the thorns that smell faintly of cloves. You rise, not because of the bird, because you just know. You follow the stone path now, narrower than before, lined with hand-chiseled grooves barely deeper than a coin's width. The grooves shimmer slightly, just enough to suggest they've held water recently, or memory. Hard to say which. You round a bend and find yourself face to face with something that looks, frankly, out of place. A cannon. Yes, a literal cannon. It sits on a small elevated platform under an arbor of tangled bougainvillea, half hidden beneath decades of bird droppings and creeping moss. Brass, worn dull by time, but unmistakably a cannon. Its wide muzzle points downward at nothing, and carved onto its barrel, just above the loading hole, is a delicate engraving of a peacock feather. The gardener nearby, an older man with skin like folded leather and a turban faded to the color of pale almonds, nods at your surprise. Zamzama, he says softly. The thunder that kept time. You blink. He doesn't elaborate. So, naturally, you ask the question anyone would ask when confronted with a jungle cannon in a garden. Why? He smiles. You can hear water, he says, but sometimes the garden needs to feel time. And so you learn, Zamzama wasn't a war cannon, or at least, not just that. During the early 17th century, when certain Mughal emperors were less interested in conquering new lands and more obsessed with inventing the perfect nap environment, timekeeping became dramatic. One record suggests that at precisely midday when the sun reached its apex and the peacock's shadow disappeared entirely, the cannon would be fired. Not with cannonballs, but with a dry charge. A thunderous boom that echoed across the garden and vibrated through the stone aqueducts. It marked the single moment when no watering was allowed, because that was the emperor's dream hour, and the plants needed silence too. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread or confined to a single eccentric ruler's personal garden staff. Some claim the cannon was used only during royal visits, a performative flourish to impress foreign dignitaries. Others insist it fired daily, like a heartbeat, echoing through the pomegranate trees at precisely the moment birds went still. You step closer to the cannon. Its wheel rims are carved with patterns that resemble feathers, not spokes. A fringe belief among garden workers once held that Zamzama's vibrations helped shake loose the water trapped inside root clusters. Some even slept beside it on purpose, hoping the echo would cure their back pain or, weirdly, bring dreams of rain. You run your fingers along the warm brass. It hums faintly in the late morning heat, as if remembering 1,000 noons. Just behind the cannon is a flat slab of rose quartz embedded into the path. It looks like just another decorative flourish until you notice the lines, subtle scratches, all angling outward from a central dot like a sunburst. It's a shadow map. At noon, when the sun is directly overhead, the shadow of the cannon's aiming sight would vanish, falling exactly into the center of the rose quartz circle. That's how they knew. No shadow, no water, no noise, just the sound of silence, and maybe a few snores from a marble pavilion nearby. You walk further into the shade of a vine-covered walkway. It winds along the edge of the garden, past citrus trees heavy with lemons that look like they've been painted on. On a low stone bench, two gardeners are reclining, one fanning himself lazily with a palm frond, the other rubbing oil into the wood of a watering ladle. They're not in a hurry. No one here ever is, because the garden decides. The sun, the wind, the peacock's mood swings, the trickling of water. Even the cannon, long silent, still sits like a retired conductor in the corner. Its presence enough to keep time in memory, if not in practice. You pause beside a carved fountain that's trickling just enough to sound smug. A lizard stares at you from the lip of the basin, unmoving. Somewhere behind it, you spot another one of those sundial stones, this one square and etched with concentric rings of script. It's not Persian, not Sanskrit either, just a mix of lines and animal shapes. A tortoise, a scorpion, a cluster of peacock feathers. The outer ring seems designed to catch light only at very specific angles, perhaps once used to verify the accuracy of the cannon's shadow cue. Because yes, even when you're using a peacock shadow, you still need a backup system, a failsafe, especially when the peacock is, say, molting or hiding under the guava trees out of spite. Fringe documents mention substitute shadows, human gardeners who were trained to mimic the silhouette of a peacock. If the real one decided to nap inside the fig grove, feathered cloaks were involved, possibly stilts. One source claims a gardener once fainted from heat stroke halfway through a shadow mimic shift and was replaced by a scarecrow. No one noticed. You sip from a cup of rose water that somehow appeared in your hand. Or maybe it was always there. And then, boom, a soundless boom. You imagine it, though your bones swear they felt it, because just then, the sun reaches its apex. You tilt your head. No shadows anywhere, not even from the peacocks. One stands directly in front of a marble gate crowned, motionless, casting nothing. It's time. The watering stops. Everywhere. As if by instinct, the garden stills. A dragonfly hovers midair. The citrus leaves go quiet. Even the water pauses, still moving. Yes, but somehow softer, like it's sneaking past the sleeping emperor's window. You stand there, not daring to breathe too deeply. No peacock shadow, no watering, no noise. Just one long, quiet moment that has lasted 400 years. And just like that, the garden begins to breathe again. A bird chirps, timid at first, like it's checking to see if the coast is clear. Then a second call answers from somewhere beyond the orchard. A gardener yawns so wide you could probably store a small melon in his mouth. A lizard scurries down a sandstone pillar, and slowly, the shadows start to stretch back across the paths. Long and slanted afternoon shadows now. You walk through the quiet lanes of the lower terrace. Everything seems freshly alert, but still calm, like the garden has just blinked awake from its own nap. The sun is no longer directly above you, it's angling westward, casting soft gold slashes through the thick foliage. And this is where the garden gets clever. Each part of it is designed not just for beauty, but for strategic laziness. You pass through a bamboo grove shaped like a crescent moon, designed to catch the 3 breeze and filter it into a sunken nook covered with jasmine vines and cooled stone. The air here is distinctly cooler. This entire section was built so that you could nap outside, under a canopy of scent and birdsong, without breaking a sweat. It's garden architecture as mood lighting. Everything about it says, don't work too hard, don't move too fast, don't disturb the roses. And speaking of roses, just ahead, a peacock struts back into the open. There he is, gleaming like a walking jewelry box, dragging his glorious nonsense of a tail behind him, casting a shadow now wide and extravagant. He turns in place, slowly, not for drama. Okay, yes, for drama, but also for measurement. The gardeners are watching. They're already shifting into position, adjusting their brass watering cans and smoothing the straps of their soft cotton tunics dyed in seasonal colors. Today it's saffron and green, which means we're in a melon-friendly week. One gardener holds up a polished obsidian disc. The reflection catches the peacock's shadow, and sends a flicker toward the carved lip of a nearby fountain. That's the signal. Watering resumes. Not all at once. That would be chaos. No, this is an art form. A sequence. Each bed gets its turn. The tulsi patch first, then the lemon basil, then the roses, but only the ones on the western wall. The eastern ones are having a moment and don't want to be touched. Historians still argue whether the layout of these Mughal gardens was more about religious symbolism or pure sensual pleasure. Some claim the Chehar Bagh, the classic four-quadrant Persian-style garden, was meant to represent the Quranic paradise. Others insist it was simply a sensory playground for emperors who liked to nap beside fragrant water lilies and watch birds argue. You're just enjoying the fact that the rose bed now smells like it's singing to you. You lean on a carved railing, where vines of flowering henna have twisted themselves into knots that look suspiciously like Persian poetry. A gardener nearby yunks, barefoot, humming to himself, carries a small flask of oil. He's not watering. He's oiling the hinges on a bronze gate, because even the gates here are tuned for quiet, a squeaky hinge during emperor nap time, grounds for exile, or worse, goat guard duty. The breeze returns, bringing with it the scent of wet soil and warm petals. It carries a soft hiss, the sound of water hitting stone. You glance toward the lotus pond. The central channel has been opened again, and the water flows down its spine like silver thread unraveling across silk. You notice something peculiar. The pool is designed to reflect not just the sky, but the peacock's shadow. When the bird crosses a certain point, its shadow stretches just far enough to kiss the water's surface, and in that moment, the gardeners stop and bow slightly. It's not worship, it's acknowledgement. This creature, ridiculous and royal, is the keeper of their schedule, their living clock, their moody sundial. You sit beside the pool, running your fingers through the cool edge of the water. The stones beneath have tiny grooves etched into them like tally marks or notes. One gardener told you earlier these were shadow markers, guides for which plants got watered when the peacock shadow reached them. But you're beginning to suspect there's another reason. Maybe it was all a way to slow down, to make people look at the light, to listen to the breeze, to track time with animals instead of alarms. There's something deeply human about it, deeply non-urgent. And let's be honest, no app on your phone can tell you when it's time to miss the marigolds by reading the shade of a bird's hip feather. You stretch your legs across the sandstone. A cicada clicks. The fountain hisses. A gardener somewhere to your left sneezes into a flower all around you. The garden eases into its rhythm again. The emperor, wherever he is probably still asleep under a silk canopy cooled by soaked bamboo blinds. The peacocks are back to arguing over a pile of fallen figs. And the gardeners, they're moving like dancers now, no wasted motion, no extra sound, just water, earth, and feathered shadow moving in sync. You're no longer watching the schedule, you're inside it. And when the breeze picks up again, fluttering the hem of your robe and making the jasmine vines sway in slow unison, you realize something strange. You can feel the peacock's shadow move, even with your eyes closed. The peacock vanishes again behind a stone column, or maybe into some parallel dimension reserved for royal birds who refuse to be rushed. But its shadow remains, echoing across the polished tiles, slow and deliberate, like the ghost of time dragging its feet. You rise and stretch, not because you're tired, but because everyone else in the garden seems to be doing it. There's a universal agreement here. When the sun hits this particular angle, you pause. You adjust your tunic. You shake out your wrists. You let the air touch your neck. And then you check the rota, except there's no rota, not the way you're thinking. No clipboard, no parchment, no ink-stained supervisor yelling plant names like a drill sergeant with floral allergies. Instead, you follow a gardener toward a low bench carved with overlapping paisley patterns. He lifts the corner of a reed mat. Beneath it lies a thin slate, etched not with words, but with strokes, short lines, long lines, and what looks like the impression of a feather dipped in turmeric. He nods at it, then at the soil. Today, we water the cinnamon paths, he says, but only if the soil matches your tongue. Right, of course. You kneel beside him and reach for a handful of dirt. It's soft, warm, with just enough moisture to stick lightly to your fingers. The gardener takes a pinch, places it on his tongue for the briefest moment, then spits it delicately onto a hibiscus leaf. Too dry, he mutters. Shadow tricked us. You weren't prepared for the idea of licking soil today, but you're here now. And besides, every gardener around you is already doing it. In Mughal horticulture, it seems your tongue was just as important as your eyes. Texture, flavor, even temperature measured in how fast the grit warms your gums. These were the hidden codes, the unspoken data points. One fringe document, a scroll tucked inside a colonial-era memoir, claims that elite Mughal gardeners developed a taste vocabulary rivaling wine sommeliers. They had words for sun-dried loam, river-shade clay, and even jealous dust, which described soil that crumbled too early from impatience. Historians still argue whether this was poetic exaggeration or a genuinely developed system of agronomic tasting. Either way, it's weirdly elegant. The rota, such as it is a collaboration between all five senses. Sight checks the shadow. Touch tests the leaves. Taste evaluates the dirt. Sound listens for flow. And smell, well, smell knows when the roses have had too much to drink. You follow a gardener named Hafiz Barefoot, bearded and entirely unbothered, into the southern quadrant. This part of the garden is lined with tall papyrus reeds and tiger lilies that lean dramatically into the breeze like they're posing for a Mughal miniature. He crouches by a patch of ground that looks, honestly, no different from the rest. But Hafiz stares at it, hard, then grunts. The feather said it's time. He's referring to the reflection of the peacock feather, not the actual bird, just the flicker of sunlight bouncing off a copper plate nearby, catching the tail feather etching at exactly the right moment. It's subtle, but here, that's all the confirmation they need. He signals with his ladle a motion so slight you almost miss it. Two apprentices emerge from the shadows carrying an object wrapped in linen. They unwrap it slowly, reverently, revealing a watering vessel unlike the others. This one is shaped like a lotus pod, carved with tiny perforations and gilded with worn silver. It's for the delicate work, not splashing or soaking, but mist casting. This is the jasmine tool. They fill it carefully from a low cistern, its surface covered in floating petals that you suspect aren't accidental. The water here smells faintly of vetiver and something like sandalwood tea or memory. You kneel beside Hafiz as he begins the process. He doesn't pour. He tilts the vessel with almost imperceptible pressure, letting droplets release from the tiny holes like whispers. The jasmine plants respond instantly, perking, shifting slightly toward the wetness, as if they've been waiting for exactly this shadow, this tool, this man, this moment. You watch in silence, not wanting to break the spell. Too much. Hafiz murmurs. You freeze. He's not talking to you. He's talking to the wind. Because now, a breeze has come unexpected. Cool, persistent, and it carries droplets away from the plants. That can't happen. Not here. Not now. Not during the jasmine shift. So he waits, just holds the pod still, upright, unmoving. And the wind listens. It softens, shifts direction, retreats just enough. He resumes. Each plant gets no more than a few seconds of mist. He counts internally, lips barely moving. You want to ask what number he uses, but instead you glance at the copper plate again. The feather reflection is gone, and that means time's up. They pack the pod away, rewrap it in linen, and vanish into the papyrus like gardeners trained by ghosts. You stand, not entirely sure how long you've been kneeling. The sun has dipped slightly. Shadows grow taller, thinner. They no longer creep, they stretch, like cats waking from sleep. And you realize something. The rota wasn't ever a list. It was a choreography, a dance written in bird shadows, water songs, and tongue-tested soil. No wonder nothing here ever needs to be explained. Everything in this garden already knows what to do. Even you. The wind changes again, not abruptly, not like a gust, just a shift, a nudge, as if someone whispered into the ear of the trees, and they're now leaning in to listen. The neem branches rustle first, then the slender cassia twigs, and finally the tamarind leaves begin their soft percussion. You're not alone in noticing. The head gardener, his robe dyed the same dusty teal as the pond turtle's, tilts his head ever so slightly, eyes narrowing at the shimmer in the leaves. His fingers twitch, then still, then twitch again. It's not just wind, it's timing. You follow his gaze to a nearby neem tree. There, strung between two branches, hangs a small bundle of fabric and bells, fluttering just enough to tickle the wind. But what it's really tickling is attention, because this particular shift in breeze tells the garden it might be time to water early. Might, the gardener mutters, depends on what the wind heard. You don't question it. Instead, you crouch beside him, mirroring his posture. He doesn't look at you, but he begins to speak slowly, more to the air than to anyone in particular. Some winds come from the north and bring rumors of rain. Others slip sideways from the west and bring only gossip, no clouds. But if the wind rustles the neem and not the fig, that means it's dry gossip. You nod. Of course, dry gossip. Obviously, in Mughal gardens, weather forecasting wasn't left to charts or telescopes. It was listening. Wind through neem had a different rhythm than wind through chinar or banyan. Gardeners trained for years to hear the difference. Some even swore that the trees themselves would answer if you asked nicely and knew how to wait. Historians still argue whether this tree-wind dialogue was a coded language or just the poetic indulgence of bored royal staff. But either way, the system worked. More than one record describes entire watering schedules being shifted based solely on the tone of a breeze. Today's tone, hesitant. The gardener rises, walks over to a sand basin set beneath an awning of silk vines, and picks up a single neem leaf. He presses it gently between his palms and holds it to his ear. Nothing. Then crack. The leaf splits. Clean. Crisp. Not too brittle. Not too soft. That's our answer, he says. Start the afternoon cycle early, just like that. The rota adjusts. You follow the subtle ripple of response. One gardener nods to another. A third whistles once, low. A fourth lifts a copper ladle and lets the sun glint off its curve. That's the signal for the east quadrant. Shift now. And just like that, everything realigns. You're guided next to a marble platform with a low, square opening in its center. It looks like a well, but smaller and quieter. Inside, a trickle of water spills across smooth black stone, then disappears again beneath a lattice of thin wooden slats. This is the Whisper Gate. Not a poetic name, that's literally what it's for. Whisper level irrigation, used only during shifts triggered by uncertain winds. They don't dare overwater. The soil is already warm from the midday sun, and some plants like the hypersensitive blue saffron can't handle surprises. They're the divas of the garden. Overwater them and they'll act offended for weeks, blooming sideways or not at all. So instead of pouring, they whisper. The water slips through channels no wider than a bracelet, winding its way under the roots and rising only as vapor. You crouch and press your palm to the stone. It's cool, damp, but there's no splash, no sound. It's like the earth is drinking in secrets. A gardener passes behind you, trailing a strip of gauze through the air. He's not cleaning. He's tracking movement. The way the fabric floats tells him if the underground channels are aligned properly. He adjusts a lever the size of a child's pinky finger. Water shifts. Slightly. The saffron nods. Slightly. Everything agrees. You stay there, crouched, watching the vapor do what rainfall can't negotiate with the roots. And that's when you hear it. A low rustle. Different from wind. It's rhythmical. Soft. It's a broom, not the sweeping kind. This one's made of peacock feathers tied to a sandalwood handle. A girl no older than 12 is walking barefoot between the beds, trailing the feather broom through the air behind her. She doesn't touch the plants, just moves the air around them. She's the shade keeper. Someone says behind you. You turn. It's a woman in a green shawl holding a basket of fig leaves. She smiles like someone who's just told you something you should have already known. Some plants get stressed when shadows flicker. She smooths them. Of course she does. It's not just about watering at the right time. It's about keeping the light consistent. A sudden gust, a shifting peacock tail, even a flicker from a passing cloud, those could startle the roots, make them pull back, make them hoard water instead of drinking it. So the girl walks, slowly, evenly, creating a rhythm the plants can trust. And honestly, you feel calmer just watching her. You follow her back toward the center path, where a tall trellis casts a neat lattice of shadow across a bed of mint. The peacock returns, strutting directly into the light. Its shadow breaks the pattern. For a split second, everything goes uneven. The girl flicks her broom gently, guiding the air. The gardeners pause, wait, then continue. Balance is restored. The mint continues to sway like nothing happened. It's like watching a living equation resolve itself in real time. The wind dies down. The neem leaves still. The saffron exhales. You don't need to check the slate anymore. You already know. You're led now up a narrow stairway just wide enough for one person, just steep enough to make you question your commitment to garden-based enlightenment. The steps are carved from red sandstone, worn smooth in the middle from generations of bare feet. At the top is a low marble platform ringed with shallow basins and copper rails, and a view. The entire garden stretches below, an emerald quilt stitched with flowers, stone, and sunlight. Water channels divide it into geometric perfection. But from up here, it looks almost accidental, like beauty happened on its own and no one dared interrupt. The wind is stronger here, cooler, touched with the scent of wet earth, lotus pollen, and something floral that doesn't quite exist in modern perfume. You inhale like it might teach you something? It does. Kind of, because at the center of this rooftop platform is a square reservoir, flat, calm, reflecting the sky like it's in a staring contest. This is the Abshar-e-Sarbara, the headwater of all directions, and from it, everything flows. Below the surface, cleverly hidden channels funnel water to the garden's every quadrant. But the real magic is above it. Perched on the marble edge of the reservoir are 24 pigeons, motionless, all facing the same direction, watching the water like they're expecting a prophecy. A gardener kneels beside you. He gestures toward them. They're not here for crumbs, he says. They're here for evaporation. You blink. Pigeons. Evaporation. But yes, it's true. The Mughal gardeners of old learned to observe bird behavior as a measure of subtle environmental changes. Pigeons, sensitive to heat shimmer and minute shifts in humidity, would flock to the rooftop reservoir at certain hours not to drink, but to cool their feet. If too many pigeons gathered too early, it meant the garden was losing moisture faster than expected. Time to shift the watering cycle. If they avoided the water entirely, rain might be coming. Or worse, overwatering. Historians still argue whether the pigeon theory was a clever observational practice or a happy accident elevated into tradition. One French traveler claimed the rooftop birds were employed by the emperor, a kind of feathered bureaucracy. Another source insists it was the pigeons who trained the gardeners, not the other way around. You sit cross-legged at the edge of the reservoir, watching the birds tilt their heads toward the water. One steps forward, dips a foot, and coos. A gardener nearby notes it, quietly, mentally, doesn't move. Because this part of the garden requires stillness, not action. Movement stirs the air, disturbs the shimmer. Up here, shadows aren't tracked, they're listened to. And the shadow everyone's waiting on. It isn't a peacock, it's your own. Behind you, carved into the floor of the platform, is a delicate spiral of inlaid jade and lapis marking the shadow circle. If your body's shadow crosses into its center, it means the light has reached a precise angle. Not noon, not afternoon, mid-breath. That's the moment water release must begin. You glance behind. Your shadow's finger just touches the outer ring. You hold your breath. So does the gardener. Then it reaches center. A low click echoes from somewhere beneath your feet. Water begins to move. You don't see it at first, but you feel it, the shift in pressure. The faint vibration beneath the marble. A narrow copper pipe to your right fills. Then another. The sound is like someone rolling silk through a tunnel. The pigeons scatter. That's the second signal. Below, in the garden, the peacock lets out a single cry. The third. The water's been released. But this is no dramatic flood. No visible cascade. Instead, thin streams slip out from the reservoir's base. Guided by ancient gravity and quietly confident engineering, they twist through unseen channels beneath the stone walkways, feeding side basins and underbed soakers that release vapor at precisely timed intervals. You're invited to look through a small window, just a hand-sized slit carved into the platform's outer rim. You kneel and peer down. Below, in the far north quadrant, a jasmine bed is exhaling. That's the best way to describe it. The soil darkens by just a shade. The leaves lift slightly. No water is visible. But something invisible has arrived and the plant recognizes it. Another gardener hands you a small dish of soaked saffron threads, placed beside a folded fan of banana leaf. Scent test. He says, you take a whiff. It's subtle, faintly bitter, sharp, with a whisper of copper. Too early. He nods. Wait, another half shadow. That's how they measure time now. Not minutes, not hours. Half a shadow. You glance back at your own, stretched across the inlaid stone like an obedient dog. It's shrinking now. That means the evaporation cycle has begun in earnest. And you're at the source. A light bell sounds just once. From below, the gardener stands. That means it's time to check the peacock. If he's in the eastern quadrant, the roses can be misted. If not, they wait. You ask, what if he doesn't show? He smiles, walking toward the steps. Then you wait. Of course you do. Because in this garden, patience isn't a virtue. It's protocol. Back on the lower path now. Your feet fall into rhythm with the stones. Everything smells slightly richer than before, riper, warmer, laced with whatever secrets were carried down from that rooftop reservoir. The light is tilted, shadows longer, more deliberate. The peacock has not reappeared, but his absence is just another kind of presence here. You find yourself walking along a corridor of tall grasses and low murmurs, not human murmurs. Water murmurs, subterranean. You can't see the channels, but you know they're just beneath you, humming along like the garden's bloodstream. You pause and crouch. The stone is warm, the air is thick, and the sand beside the stone walkway tells you more than any scroll ever could. There, stamped into the packed earth, are footprints, not random, not recent, coded. You tilt your head. Each footprint is deliberate, some shallow, some pressed deeper, some curved with heel, others flat with toe. They form a path, not a trail. And then you see it. Along the edge of the route, tiny half-moons are etched in the soil with a stick or fingertip. Every few feet, a line crosses the trail like a musical bar. You touch one, then another. The patterns repeat in intervals. A gardener nearby glances down, nods. Morning trail, he says. 2 cycles old. Western pass. Watered once. You ask, cautiously. You can read this. He doesn't answer. He steps into it. Perfectly. Each footstep lands in the same groove, retracing the pattern, until the footprints seem to animate themselves. You watch, mesmerized. He's not walking, he's recording. Again, reasserting what was done, when it was done, and who did it. This is wet sand code, a forgotten Mughal system for tracking garden labor without ink, without voice, without time, just earth, pressure, and motion. Historians still argue whether this code developed during the reign of Jahangir, who notoriously hated paper in gardens, or whether it evolved earlier. Passed from Persian irrigation traditions where shepherds marked trails using hoof-shaped stones. One fringe claim suggests the gardeners could even encode complaints into their footsteps. A shallow heel drag indicated fatigue. A twist at the toe meant irritation with a fellow gardener. A double press. That was gossip or sarcasm, depending on direction. You continue walking beside the code. Now that you've seen it, you can't unsee it. It's everywhere. Along the edges of mint beds, at the entrances of vine trellises, near the citrus grove, where the wind once shifted the rhoda. The messages lie there in plain soil. Most visitors never notice them. But here, they are the garden's journal. It's soft, fading history, rewritten every morning and erased by every breeze. And suddenly, you wonder how many stories were lost, how many arguments resolved underfoot, how many perfect waterings logged in a pattern no historian would ever decode because no one thought to read beneath. You kneel and press your own palm into the sand, next to a set of twin heel prints, warm, still slightly damp. That means the soil here was watered less than half a shadow ago. But that's not the only message. There's a feather, not a peacock's, but something smaller tucked into the sand like a signature. A blue-green plume, curved just so, pointing back toward a fig tree leaning slightly east. You follow. The tree's roots stretch wide, surface level, like a sleeping animal's limbs. Underneath them is another shallow basin. No stone, just sand, raked into curves and spirals, and in the center deliberate, unmistakable a palm print. This one's old. Not from today. The sand around it has settled, softened, but it's been preserved. No one has walked through it. No one has disturbed it. It's intentional, memorial. A voice says behind you. You turn. A boy no older than 9 stands barefoot, a length of twine wrapped around one hand. For a gardener who used to mark her shift here, he says, she liked the fig tree's shadow best. You ask what happened. He shrugs. She went east, with the clouds. You're not sure if that's poetic, literal, or just a child's way of saying goodbye, but you bow your head all the same. The sun shifts again. You feel it without looking. Your shadow lengthens just enough to touch the edge of the fig root. You stand quietly and step backward so as not to overwrite the palm. The boy steps forward and smooths the edge with his twine, tracing the curves like lines of a prayer. Somewhere, the peacock cries, once brief, sharp, distant, and with that, you know the jasmine bed must be finished. Time to rotate. You rise and begin walking again, this time along a narrower path that cuts behind the zinnias. It's quieter here. The soil is lighter, chalkier, whispering dust rather than damp, but still. The code continues lighter footprints, staggered, with tiny pinpricks alongside them. The pinpricks mean delicate hands, apprentice trail, first week. You smile, everyone starts somewhere, even here, even you. You don't mean to stop walking, but the scent stops you. It's sudden, like stepping into a memory. You never had rose and sun-warmed silk, with a trace of something you can't name. You turn your head and see it, a bed of pale orange roses, each bloom tilted upward like it's listening, and one, right at the edge, is collapsed. Its petals slump over the stem like it fainted. You crouch beside it, expecting to see rot or bugs or snapped root, but no, it's flawless, whole, just dramatically down. A gardener steps forward, clutching a fan made of palm ribs. She's not sick, he says, just late. You raise an eyebrow. He points to the shadow, not yours, not his, but the shadow of a marble sundial, standing across the path. Its long finger of shade stretches eastward, stopping just short of the rose's curled tip. When the shadow touches her, he says, she'll rise. You want to laugh, but then again, look where you are. This is the rose that faints. Well, not just one, a species cultivated here, and nowhere else, to respond precisely to a moment of indirect light and micro-watering, timed not with clocks but shadows. Some say these roses were bred for royal drama so that once per day, at a designated angle of sunlight, they would droop in anticipation of being revived. Historians still argue whether the effect was deliberate bioengineering or a lucky side effect of obsessive Mughal rose breeding. Either way, the result is undeniable. You lean closer. There's no wilting, just a theatrical sag. The gardener gently waves his fan to shift the air and moves to the next bloom. That one stands tall, satisfied. But your little drama queen waits. You glance back at the sundial. The shadow is crawling forward slow, like it knows. She'll be fine, the gardener says. She always is, but she likes to make us nervous. And sure enough, as the edge of the sundial's shadow kisses the tip of the outermost petal, the rose gives a subtle twitch. Not a full lift, just enough to say, you may begin. A second gardener arrives with a copper misting flute. He doesn't pour, he breathes through it. The fine vapor fans out, like morning breath in winter, coating the air around the rose but never touching it directly. Just a suggestion of moisture. The rose perks, one petal first, then another, until she stands fully alert, pretending like nothing ever happened. The gardener bows to her. Yes, bows, because in this quadrant, the roses are in charge. You walk further, passing row after row of rose varieties, each with its own temperament. Some prefer shade, others only bloom when watered from the left. One is known to droop for 3 days straight if you speak near it while wearing red. And tucked in between these beds, you find small slates nailed to the garden wall. Each one bears a symbol, a shadow length, a stylized bird, a rose petal shape. No words, these are the rose logs. The gardeners record watering data here again, not with numbers or times, but symbols. Today's entry shows a crescent arc representing the sundial shadow intersecting a spiral, the motion of mist. That tells the next shift. This rose fainted on schedule and recovered with honor. No intervention needed tomorrow unless the breeze interferes. You run your hand across the edge of the wall. The stone is damp, faintly perfumed. Even the moisture here carries a memory. Nearby, another apprentice is setting down small pebbles carefully arranged in a spiral. You ask what she's doing. Resetting the drama, she says, because tomorrow the rose must perform again, and the shadow needs a guide. So these pebbles trace where the light will move based on today's angle and the position of a tiny mirror placed just outside the garden walls. That mirror redirects sunlight subtly, never enough to disturb, just enough to coax. You step away to watch it unfold. The rest of the rose bed is being misted now, the gardeners moving with the ease of musicians repeating a familiar song. They don't talk. They don't need to. Each plant has a personality, a name, a known mood. One gardener even pats a bloom on the head like an old friend. Remember when you refused to open during the Persian ambassador's visit? He mutters, amused, "You little traitor." And the rose honestly looks a little smug. There's a rhythm here you hadn't noticed before. Not just the water and shadows, but the performance. This is theater, floral theater. Every quadrant of this garden plays its part. Some are loud, like the citrus groves. Some whisper, like the fig beds. And some, like these roses, prefer a spotlight and a full audience. You sit on a low step. The scent almost overwhelming now, honey and warmth and a faint powdery sharpness. The sun lowers just a degree more, casting a fresh wave of golden haze over the petals. And right then, the same rose from earlier shivers. Not the wind, not mist, just herself. She knows she's being watched, and she loves it. You close your eyes, you can still feel her swaying. The shadow stretches further, and somewhere far off, the peacock finally cries again, "Us." Time to check the lilies. The path to the lily pond is quieter, not solemn, just hushed. The air has shifted again, thick with water scent, and a silence that isn't empty, but waiting. You walk slower now, your footsteps naturally syncing with the garden's new tempo. Fewer birds here, no roses flirting, no peacocks screaming at the horizon. Just frogs you can't see and the occasional creak of bamboo as it leans into dusk. You arrive at the pond, long and rectangular, framed with carved stone and gently overgrown edges. Lily pads sprawl like lazy nobility across its surface. And in the center, one stone pedestal holds a bronze bowl. It's dry, intentionally, because this is star-watering territory. The gardener here wears dark indigo, no ornament, no copper tools, just a satchel of river stones and a folded piece of thick parchment in his hand. He nods once and looks up, not at you, but at the sky. There are still hours until sunset, but he's already thinking ahead, because some parts of this garden don't follow sunlight. They follow starlight. Yes, you heard that right. These lilies, delicate and temperamental, open only at night. But they don't just rely on darkness. They rely on celestial cues. The angle of certain stars, especially the brighter winter constellations, tells them when to lift, bloom, fold. And the gardeners, they watch the skies like ancient timekeepers. You sit beside him. He unfolds the parchment. Not a map. Not really. A chart of star-watering rotations, rendered in dots and loops. No dates or words. Just curved lines showing when Vega touches the horizon or when the Pleiades flicker past the top of the neem grove. Tonight is a north cycle bloom. He says, no mist. Just basin soap. You ask how he knows. He doesn't look down. The frogs are already loud. And sure enough, you hear them. Not many, just 2 or 3. But their call is timed, specific. One fringe theory claims Mughal gardeners trained frogs to sing on cue, feeding them at intervals linked to star rise. Another, slightly more believable, suggests the frogs naturally align to the rhythms of nightly watering, responding to moisture and light shifts as they occurred over decades. Historians still argue whether frogs are employees or freeloaders. The gardener pulls a single string from his satchel, a bell so small it barely counts as one hangs from the end. He doesn't ring it. He dips it into the water. No sound, just vibration. Then, a ripple. Then, lilies begin to shift. You don't see the change right away, but you feel it. A tension unwinding. Leaves turning upward, cupping invisible starlight. A petal stirs. A bud twitches. One opens halfway, as if to ask, are you sure? and then unfolds fully, accepting the answer. This is the graveyard shift of the garden. A small crew arrives behind you, quiet as ghosts. They carry no lamps, no tools that shine. One holds a bundle of moss. Another has a hollowed gourd filled with water that smells like something between mint and old rain. They don't speak. They listen to frogs, to the breeze, to the plants, to the stars. And then they move. The first lays the moss gently along the stone edge, dipping it in water and pressing it against the root wall. The second unplugs a clay stopper hidden at the base of the pedestal. Slowly, the pond's surface level begins to drop just an inch or two. That drop, it tells the lilies it's time. The shift in pressure mimics the descent of the moon, triggering the petals to open wide. These flowers don't want water poured on them. They want the water to move around them. You sit perfectly still, mesmerized. One lily, close enough to touch, flutters slightly, releasing a scent so delicate it feels imaginary, like a perfume you forgot you loved. The gardener finally speaks. Moonlight does the rest. We just get it started. Above you, the first stars appear, bright, reluctant, then bolder. You lean back. The sky is slowly pulling a dark sheet over the garden. And in this quadrant, that's the signal to begin again. Because Mughal gardens weren't only built for day. Some of their most intricate rituals happened at night, when the air cooled and the sky opened. In some accounts, night watering was considered sacred. A few gardens were even closed during the day, open only after dusk. When select caretakers used polished obsidian bowls to reflect starlight onto certain beds, whether this was mysticism, performance, or science disguised as poetry, no one knows, but it worked. Tonight, one gardener is placing polished quartz along the pond's edge, not randomly, deliberately. Each stone aligns with a reflection of a star. The quartz catches the light and scatters it not brightly, but just enough to convince a lily it's time to bloom. You stay longer than you mean to. The stars multiply. The lilies open fully, and the entire pond smells like quiet. You're offered a cup of lotus tea, cool, sweet, faintly floral, and you sip it without speaking. A breeze moves across the surface. The lilies sigh, and the frogs begin a new song, low, rhythmic, like a lullaby for plants. You don't know what time it is, but you know exactly what moment you're in. The tea is still warm in your hand when someone says the word melon. Quietly, like an alarm disguised as a fruit, you turn your head slowly. 3 gardeners have gathered near the eastern edge of the pond, their shoulders tight, expressions unusually serious. One is holding a melon with both hands, like it's a scroll of imperial secrets. Another is squinting toward the garden wall. The third, older, silk-robed, with the patience of someone who's watched a lot of things go wrong, is checking a feather. Not just any feather, a peacock tail tip. Dried, lacquered, mounted on a sliver of teak. It's used like a ruler but for shadows. And the shadow in question, it's almost touching the melon. You may want to sit down for this. Because melon time in the Mughal garden isn't casual, it isn't snack hour, it is a precision ritual, bordering on panic. This melon, the one held like a newborn, is part of the emperor's personal crop. These are Shahi Kakri melons, long, pale, impossibly sweet, and every one of them must ripen exactly when its shadow matches the length of a particular ivory strip carved into the inner garden wall. And today, the math isn't mathing. The feather shadow ruler shows a length that's about half a finger too short. The melon's actual shadow, slightly curled. It means it may have over-ripened by an hour, maybe 2. This, in other gardens, would be fine. Here, it's nearly treason. You're gently ushered into a melon alcove. Yes, that's a thing. With a slatted wood awning and polished stone floor, cool from misting. The melons are arranged in rows, each on a silk cradle, each labeled not with numbers but poetic nicknames. Moon Sweet, River Soft, Throat Music, Kiss of Rain. A scroll lies beside the cradle, a list of projected shadow times for each melon, not by date, not by hour, but by the length and direction of a peacock's shadow, logged daily against the shape of the fruit's lower curve. One is marked, due at peacock elbow, pod 1 grain. It's now past peacock elbow. The emperor's gardener, the same older man, is visibly sweating, not from heat. He adjusts the peacock feather ruler again and mutters, "The emperor expects this one at moonrise, not before." You ask too boldly. Maybe what happens if the melon is early? He doesn't look at you. He just says, then I feed it to the toy and tell no one. Fair enough. You take a step back. This tension, this fruit-based anxiety, it isn't new. Historians note that Emperor Shah Jahan once delayed a royal dinner because the shadow of his favorite melon fell 3 minutes short of the required tail curl. Another source suggests he had a gardener reassigned to pigeon latrine duty because a melon arrived tacky. Fringe accounts even claim a decoy melon was once carved from papaya and chilled in the mist basin to stall time. It worked barely. The emperor praised it. The gardener fainted. The melon eventually fed to a passing civet. Today, though, it's up to this small team of gardeners to rescue the timing. One adjusts a cloth canopy to slightly dim the light. Another pours a thin stream of water on the stone beneath the melon, hoping cooler shadows will stall the bloom effect. A third begins whispering to the fruit. You think it's ridiculous? Until the melon shivers, just a twitch, barely perceptible, but real. They nod. It's working. Melons, as it turns out, are hypersensitive to light, heat, and attention. Here, they are watered not on schedule, but by courtly cues. If the emperor is restless, water withheld. If he's sleeping well, water misted. If he's in mourning, no water at all, just wind. Because it's not just about fruit, it's about symbolism. A perfect melon says the empire is in balance, an overripe one, a quiet warning. And now, the feather shadow finally aligns with the melon's curve. One breath more. A junior gardener gently lifts it, bows, and tucks it into a velvet sling. The entire team walks slowly, reverently toward a shaded gate flanked by cedar trees and guarded by 2 doves in a cage. No one speaks. You're told the melon will now be weighed against its own reflection in a bowl of moonlit water, and if it floats perfectly centered, served with rose ice and grated cardamom at midnight. If not, fed to the koi. You ask if that's wasteful. The gardener shrugs. The koi keep the secret. You linger a moment longer, staring at the now empty melon cradle. A breeze stirs the silk. You imagine the emperor biting into that fruit, eyes closed, oblivious to the shadow panic that delivered it to his plate, and then the peacock cries again, a single sharp note from across the garden. Time to water the coriander beds. You stand, strangely relieved that you're not in charge of melons. You leave the melon alcove like someone tiptoeing out of a scandal. The tension lifts as soon as you round the bend. The coriander doesn't care about shadows. The coriander just wants to live. It grows in wide beds under lattice shade, easygoing. Low drama, fragrant in a way that feels grounded, humble. You breathe in the scent, earthy, citrusy, alive. But before your feet even reach the path, you hear it. A bell, not the kind that signals time. Not the one tied to pigeons, or wind, or mist rotations. This one has a different tone. Deeper, slow, and coming from the far western corner of the garden, the one roped off, where no one walks. Not anymore. A gardener notices you flinch. That's just the old bell, she says. Ignore it. But nobody does. Everyone pauses for half a breath, for a flicker of shadow, because that bell, it hasn't been officially rung in decades. They call it the peacock bell. And according to legend, it used to be rigged to chime only when a real peacock's shadow, no substitute, no human mimic, passed over a specific bronze disc inlaid in the garden floor. A system of lenses and mirrors made it happen. The bird would strut past. The light would angle just right. The shadow would stretch, hit the disc, and clang. It meant begin, or end, or beware. Historians still argue about its purpose. Some say it signaled the end of the emperor's dreams. Others claim it triggered a secret irrigation flush from a hidden tank. One theory suggests the bell rang during political upheavals, somehow tuned to sense tension in the air. Fringe speculation. Maybe, but then again, the bell has rung 6 times in the last month and no peacock was present. You're already walking toward it. You know you shouldn't. But the gardeners don't stop you. They just glance sideways, like you're walking into a place that smells faintly of memory. You arrive at the forbidden quadrant. It's not overgrown, not wild. Still kept, but only just. The hedges are too neat. The soil a little too dry. The symmetry too perfect, as if preserved, not nurtured. The bell is there, hung from a marble post, patina thick on its bronze curve. Beneath it, That famous shadow disk polished, untouched, and empty. Except now, it isn't, because a feather-long, iridescent, unmistakable has drifted down into its center. You crouch. It's not from a live peacock. It's coated in oil, preserved, deliberate. Someone planted it, and that someone knew what it would do, because the moment it landed, the reflection off the disc would have mimicked the shadow the mirror lens setup once relied on. Just enough light, just enough angle, and the bell would have chimed. You look around. No one is near you now. The air is thick. The trees don't rustle. The silence here is a different species, less relaxed, more waiting. You step carefully, noticing the soil is strange paler, finer, like it's been sifted. The beds nearby aren't planted with herbs or lilies or roses. They're planted with saffron, or rather they were. Now the beds lie fallow, roped with dry lines of husk and old stems. And a sign carved in Persian leans crookedly from a stake, silence before bloom. A gardener once told you this section of the garden used to grow Mughal ceremonial saffron, reserved only for rites, used only in weddings, burials, and water rituals involving new emperors. No one harvested it by hand. They let the wind shake the pollen loose. If too much was collected, it meant the calendar was off. The garden was unbalanced. So they stopped growing it altogether. But the shadow bell still rings, and lately, it rings on days when the garden feels wrong. The older gardeners say nothing, but apprentices whisper. Someone is manipulating shadows, planting fake feathers, altering mirror angles, creating a false signal. You notice now subtle scratches around the disc. Someone's been adjusting it. Tiny drag marks where a lens was moved. The message is clear. Someone wants this bell to be heard again. You stand and walk backwards slowly, careful not to disturb the old saffron beds. The air behind you grows lighter. The sounds return. A frog croaks, a tree stirs, and someone gently blocks your path. Not menacing, just standing. It's the Emperor's melon gardener. He says nothing, but in his hand is a copper feather tool, the same kind used to read peacock shadows. He holds it out, flat. Next time, he says, "Bring your own shadow." You nod, not sure what that means. He steps aside, and you walk back toward the coriander beds, where the water still runs in smooth arcs, and no bells interrupt the soil. But you hear it once more behind you, softer now. Clang, as if the garden is remembering something it's not supposed to. You don't ask questions on the way back, because in this garden, asking too much is like overwatering makes things soggy, then rot. You return to the coriander beds and try to act normal. The gardeners are still working, still humming, but they've all heard the bell. You can tell by the way they glance not directly at you, but toward the western quadrant, then away, then down, like birds pretending not to notice a hawk overhead. You kneel beside an herb patch, trying to focus. The scent of crushed green leaves fills the air, cool, fresh, non-political, just coriander doing its job. You envy it a little. A gardener beside you nudges your shoulder with the handle of her rake. "Be careful," she says softly. Some beds remember. You look up. Her eyes flick toward the saffron quadrant, then back to her work. And that's when you notice something odd. This bed, the coriander bed, it's supposed to be dry today, according to everything you've learned. It should have been watered yesterday. Light misting. No repeat. But the soil, too dark. The scent, too rich. The edges of the bed curl slightly inward, the way plants do when they've been pampered. Someone's been overwatering. On purpose, you brush your hand along the soil's surface. It crumbles unevenly. Beneath that, a patch of smoothed clay with footprint drag. Not footprints like before. These are scuffed, wiped, as if someone erased them after walking here. And in the corner of the bed, a sliver of broken glass, thin, curved, a mirror shard. You hold it up. It's not decorative. It's part of the old peacock shadow system. From the quadrant where no one's supposed to go. Someone brought it here, which means someone's trying to manipulate the timing of the entire garden. "Testing," says a voice behind you. You spin. It's not a gardener. It's a boy, maybe 14, carrying a shallow copper bowl. His eyes are bright, a little too fast, like he already knows 10 things you don't. "Testing shadows," he says, tapping the bowl. They're trying to see if they can fake peacock timing. Without the bird, you frown. Why? He grins. Because time's up. The empire's ending. He says it like it's no big deal, like it's been ending slowly for years. And now people just want to know who gets to rewrite the watering schedule. You follow him without meaning to. He ducks beneath an arch of climbing gourds and into a narrow passage behind the garden's central fountain. There, nestled between two cooling stones, is another mirror angled just so. It throws sunlight onto the northern lily basin. Where the star watering shift was never meant to begin during daylight, they're training substitutes, he whispers, for the peacock, for the stars, for the gardeners, so the next rulers can fake the cycle. Next rulers. He shrugs. Not emperors, not kings. Something newer, sharper, less interested in listening to frogs. You stare, and then you understand this garden is being rehearsed. Someone's practicing shadow placement, faking petals to open early, testing how far you can push a jasmine or fool a lily. Someone wants control not through patience, but precision, manufactured balance. You ask him who? He just points upward, not to the sky, to a watchtower, just outside the garden wall. You hadn't noticed it before. It blends in marble and lattices like a decorative rooftop pavilion, but now you see it clearly, and there's a lens glinting in the sunlight. Someone's watching, logging every shadow, every delay, every exception, trying to recreate what the garden used to do organically. The boy hands you the copper bowl. Inside is a single drop of water. Test it, he says. You tilt the bowl, letting the drop roll across the metal. It leaves a trail, curves once, stops. Exactly where the emperor's melon shadow was meant to stop 3 days from now. Pre-calculated, reverse-engineered, planned. They're trying to run the whole thing without waiting, the boy says. Without peacocks, without wind, just data. You hand him back the bowl, and for a second, neither of you speaks. Then he adds, almost sadly, they think they can skip the listening part. You walk back towards the coriander bed in a strange silence. Now, even the mint seems tense. The air feels different, measured, and you realize the peacock hasn't cried in a while. The silence stretches too long. You know it. Now not just as absence, but imbalance. The garden has a rhythm. You've heard it, felt it, learned its pace like a slow song that never hurries and never forgets a note. But now, a beat is missing. The peacock hasn't cried in over a full shadow, not once. You walk the edge of the central path, listening harder than ever before. The fountain sputters in sync. The coriander glows green with satisfaction, but the air has that odd sharpness again, like someone tuning an instrument that isn't theirs. And when you look toward the watchtower, you see something new. A flag. Small, not imperial, not decorative. Plain cloth, pale blue, and fluttering slightly in the wind, measured, marked, deliberate. It's a time signal, a new one. The gardeners see it too. You can tell by the hesitation, the slight pause in movement. One lowers his watering ladle before it's empty. Another glances toward the sky, calculating light not by sun but by flag. This isn't the garden's way. It's colonial precision, a new regime. Quiet but already testing control, has introduced flags and clocks and sky lenses, a system with no room for peacock moods or rose theatrics. It promises efficiency, but at the cost of something the garden never needed to name. You walk toward the older gardener, the one who handled the emperor's melons. He's sitting now just beside the jasmine bed, weaving stems into a pattern, not to be clever, just because you kneel beside him. He doesn't look up. They're measuring shadows with sticks now, he mutters. Straight lines, metal teeth, no more feathers. You ask what that means. He pulls something from his robe pocket, a broken peacock feather, tied to a copper wire. This was a time stick, he says. Before rulers arrived. You tilt your head. Rulers. He chuckles dryly. No rulers. And he draws a long line in the dirt. The kind that divide. Then he adds, not emperors. They ruled with pauses. You understand too well. What's coming now isn't a ruler that listens for frogs. It's a ticking one. A machine. He gestures toward the roped-off quadrant. They started with the saffron, he says, because it was sensitive. Hard to track. Perfect for reprogramming. You remember the mirrored disc, the bells, the shadow manipulation. But now you see it for what it is, a prototype. The fringe quadrant was where they practiced control, where they swapped out shadow for signal, where they tested if a garden could run without patience. And maybe, for a while it worked, but something's missing. And as if on cue, the gardener says, they can't get the peacocks to come back. You blink. They've been gone since the flag went up. He adds, they don't trust it. You glance toward the fig grove. Empty. Not even a tail feather in the dust. You ask, where did they go? He shrugs. Where shadows aren't told what shape to be. You want to laugh, but can't. Because suddenly, the garden feels hollow. Still beautiful. Still blooming. But missing its wild timekeeper, the one who didn't care about reports or measurements, who cried because the wind was strange, or because the lilies needed drama, who reminded the garden to breathe. Now, there's only silence. Then something shifts. A gardener down the path drops his pail, not in shock, in relief. You follow his gaze to the east wall, and there, just above the cedar gate, standing boldly in the sun, tail fanned out like a painted lie, a peacock, one of theirs. You freeze. It struts once. Slowly, its shadow falls over a bed of moss, long, steady, glorious. And then, the sound, that cry, not elegant, not timed, not symmetrical, but alive, real, unmistakably not approved. The flag flutters harder now, as if reacting. But the gardeners, they're smiling, and one by one, they raise their hands not to salute the tower, but to mirror the peacock, each hand casting a shadow beside a bed, a bowl, a bloom. Time returns, and it doesn't tick. It walks, feathered, unscheduled, and absolutely unrepentant. The peacock takes one more slow, theatrical step, its tail fans full. Now an entire library of green fire unfolding in the sunlight. The shadow it casts is long, shimmering, alive with tiny movement, the kind of shadow that doesn't just mark time, it writes it, and every gardener in the vicinity stops. One lowers a watering ladle mid-pour, another kneels, still holding a pruning blade, but it never touches the stem. Even the frogs, oddly enough, fall silent, as if the garden has collectively held its breath. Then, softly, gently, a watering can tips. One stream begins. No signal, no flag, no metal ruler precision, just a return to the original rhythm. The peacock's shadow continues to drift slow, deliberate, majestic in its indifference. It cuts across the coriander, the fennel, the jasmine that had sulked all afternoon suddenly perks. A few lilies near the pond tremble, even though the wind has gone still. You trail behind it, steps matching the shadow's pace. The ground feels familiar again, warm, deliberate, soft in the way only well-watered earth can be. The apprentices are now following the peacock instead of the tower's flags. One is even humming something slow and old, a song that doesn't need lyrics, just breath and memory. And overhead, the flag still flutters, but no one looks at it. Even the pigeons on the rooftop reservoir seem to face the opposite way now, beaks angled toward the bird. Not the metal. You return to the center of the garden. The peacock struts toward the disc again, the one under the old bell. You half expect the bell to ring, but it doesn't. The shadow touches the disc, and nothing happens. Except everything does, because all around you, the garden exhales. You can feel it in the way the breeze returns, in how the mint stops curling, how the fig leaves shiver slightly as if someone whispered a good secret. Even the soil seems to glow darker in the right places, lighter where it should be, balanced. The boy from before, the one with the copper bowl, passes by you again, but this time, he doesn't speak. He just gives you a quiet nod, then places the bowl down beside a bed of shy bluebells and walks away. Inside the bowl, a single drop of water, just enough for one petal. You reach the bench again, the same shaded one from earlier, the one where you watched the first peacock's shadow stretch across the sandstone. You sit. The garden continues around you, but there's no rush now. Just rhythm, just presence. The melon panic, forgotten. The mirrors, irrelevant. The old bell, silent, but not needed. Because for the first time all day, the garden doesn't feel watched or measured. It just feels right. The peacock turns once, looks directly at you for a split second. You wonder if it recognizes you. Then it blinks, lets out a hoarse honk. that completely ruins the moment and struts off into the citrus grove like the diva it is. You smile because you know something now, something only those who've watched the garden breathe from morning until night can truly say, you are the timekeeper now. Not because you own a watch, not because you memorize the rotations, but because you listen to feathers, to frogs, to soil pressed with memory, and to the space between peacock shadows. You close your eyes, the wind returns, soft as silk, somewhere behind you. A gardener hums an old watering tune, and in your mind, the garden begins again without flags, without mirrors, without permission, just rhythm, just trust. Just time. So now, you're sitting on that old stone bench. Your hands are dusted with memory. Your feet echo soil that never rushed you. You've seen time slip across leaves and petals, climb the spines of fountains, nest inside lilies and lilies again. And maybe now, the air feels slower on your skin. Maybe your own breath feels longer, more thoughtful, like it finally caught up to itself. This garden doesn't ask you to move quickly. It asks you to notice. Notice how silence isn't empty. It's full of decisions made without a sound. Notice how a single feather misplaced or honored can change the course of a day. And notice how not all shadows are meant to be chased. Some are meant to be waited for. The peacock is gone now. Somewhere between the fig grove and the edge of the melon beds, it vanished again, as it always does, but that's all right. You don't need it anymore. Because now, when the light begins to shift again tomorrow, you'll feel it in your bones, in the breeze, in the quiet moment before a watering ladle tips forward. And maybe, just maybe, you'll pause right before your day begins and remember how this garden did it. Softly, patiently, with a shadow and a song, and no clock at all. Sleep well, timekeeper. You've earned your rest.